Again, please, and salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could you do roll call, Mary Ann?
Yes, Budget Committee, George Fisher.
Absent.
Budget Committee, Laura Fisher.
Here.
Budget Committee, Lance Masters.
Yes.
Budget Committee, Tiffany Pruitt.
Here.
Budget Committee, Tom Cramlett.
Here.
Budget Committee Member, Sandy Kelly.
Here.
Budget Committee Member, Kevin Benson.
Here.
Budget Committee, Eva Zerving.
Here.
Budget Committee Member, Darlene Solinger.
Here.
Budget Committee Member, Shauna Hazel.
Here.
Budget Committee Member, Karen Syke.
Present. Budget
Committee Member, Guy DeHate.
Here.
Budget Committee Member, Bobby Walker.
Here.
Budget Committee Member, Don Hay.
Here. Okay, now, we have two sets of minutes. One of us has been given to us tonight, so we haven't had a chance to review that. And the other one is for June 3rd. And unless anybody had any special objections, I'd like to table that for now and get on to our more important business and come back to that when we meet a little later on. Because I think that we're limited in time and we have a lot of important things to talk about. Although, I did beat Sherelle for the next thing. I believe there was a misunderstanding during our last meeting. I have not had a change of heart over what I felt should happen. But I misinterpreted an action that was taken. And I believe a lot of the committee members may have misinterpreted this action. And it led to a decision which essentially annihilated any funding, any possibility of funding for the fire department for the next fiscal year. And I would like at this time for you, if you could, to read the motion that was made and the people who voted in favor of it. You kind of read it to me a little bit earlier today because I couldn't sleep last night and something kept bothering me and I thought about this all night and kind of figured out, you know, what I thought we had done. And so I called and found out that yes, indeed, that's what we did.
Okay, the first motion I have is Budget Committee Member Benson made a motion to include a line item of $59,938.96 as a deficit in the EMS fund, seconded by Budget Committee Member Solinger. And then after some discussion, Budget Committee Member Benson modified his motion to say to enter the actual negative balance of the deficit.
And Rich, would you tell us what the result of that action was?
Well, since it was a line item under budget law, we had to balance the budget, we had to eliminate $60,000 worth of expenditures in personal services and material services to offset it, which eliminated, completely eliminated the fire chief's position. And that was my decision. I sat down with him and it was his decision in terms of if you got to balance the budget. And, a lot of the essential material and services that they need.
And so essentially, you can't count on the revenue source if you don't have the labor. And so you have to basically, don't you have to take the revenue out of that budget as well?
We also, and that's actually in Fund 5 in here, you'll see, we had to drop the revenue almost in half, and you can see what the other impacts of that was. So not only was the 60,000 gone, or had offset throughout the budget, but then you had to drop even more because the revenues went down. So it ended up being probably more like a $140,000 hit.
I was wondering if Sherelle would please read the roll call on who voted for that motion to be passed. shocked. It was unanimous except for Lance. We all voted for that to be passed. And I feel that that was not the intention of some of the committee members. And I would like to readdress that issue because I feel there was a misunderstanding and it does not reflect the intention of this budget committee. Are there any objections to that, Shauna?
Thank you, Sandra.
Welcome. Any objections to that, or does anybody understand misunderstand now? I know I have a tendency to go on and explain things in detail, and I haven't done that recently because I've been criticized for it. And from now on, you can bet this is what I'm gonna do, to make sure that myself and everybody else on the committee understands what they're voting on and what the ramifications of that vote will be. So does anybody have any objections to bringing this motion to vote again, now that there's an understanding of what the impacts will be?
I did talk to the Department of Revenue today and have an alternative. And basically what they said is, if you don't put it in as an expenditure, you could put it in as a note. For example, when we move property taxes from general fund to the EMS, there's a note in there about 45% of property taxes go to EMS. You could put a note in there that says, right behind the word beginning balance, it says, does not reflect $60,000 deficit, or something to that, along that vein in parentheses, and still show the beginning balance at 0, and then you won't have to offset the 60,000. But it becomes part of the budgetary record.
Lance?
Mr. Carson, why are you using 60,000? Because the motion that was voted on didn't give a specific number, and you repeatedly predicted a $45,000 deficit.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, Kevin pegged it at whatever it ended up being when the budget was adopted. So I just used 60,000 as a placeholder. Our estimate was 45,000. He was talking 60,000 at the end. It was said, well, just we'll use the number, whatever it is, when the budget's adopted. So take your pick.
It was intended to be a placeholder. That was my understanding of the motion, and it was my mistake and everybody's mistake apparently. But we had been discussing about how to reflect this in there and not get it left behind. And so we jumped to conclusions, the bunch of us, or that some of you may have intended it to go. And so I'd like to take care of this motion first. Let's vote on this motion. Could you please read the motion again? And if there are no objections to it.
You can't, you've got to add another motion.
Have a new motion. So could I have a motion, please, to rescind this action? Lance?
I'll make a motion that we remove the line item on page. Sorry.
I think we should, at this time, go to our old budget.
Page 15, the line item where it lists $60,000 as a recommended action, and restore. Well, I guess we're doing separate motions for
Yeah.
revenues and
Let's just take care of the one thing that's been done first, please.
that's what I just said, yeah.
Could you read that motion back, Sherelle? Because I'm not sure I understood it either.
I'll repeat it.
Okay, thank you.
Remove, there, on page,
15.
make a motion that we remove the line item from page 15 that is listed as deficit balance,
It's at the bottom,
bottom of page.
Oh,
the second one up.
Oh, yes.
Is that good? Is that clear enough?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is there a second? Maybe. Everybody in favor of remove, discussion? Kevin?
So, through this budget process, we've had the standard that we have to budget for, expected expenses. But apparently we don't have to budget for expended monies that have already been expended. So we're just going to pretend like this never happened and just go on down the road. And the $60,000 hole in this budget
anybody's intention. I think that the budget has been cut significantly, so it's more realistic, and if it's monitored correctly, that this can be a declining deficit, not an inclining deficit. And this budget, without that cut, allows enough money for the city council to find some kind of alternative, if that's the way it's going to be. I personally am not stating how I feel about that, but there needs to be something in place until that happens, and the money is not allowed for in this budget, nor is it allowed for any kind of a replacement to occur. Rich gave you a copy of the rules regarding supplemental budgets, and it is anticipated that we will need fire protection for the next year. And it's our responsibility to budget for that at this time. The only thing that could trigger a supplemental budget besides that would be a new source of revenue, which would be a great thing, but it's not in the bag. But we do know we need some kind of coverage for the next 12 months. Rich?
The only person who got the supplemental budget information was you, because it was a discussion you had, and I had on the side. I mean, I can run it for him. It's just basically a copy of the ORS that shows the conditions under which you can do a supplemental budget.
And it is indeed. If it can be anticipated at this process, and if we budget out this money from emergency services and don't allow enough for some other program for the rest of the year or this program to continue, there will be no supplemental budget to fix it. This is our responsibility. It's a foreseeable expense. So I feel I take my responsibilities very seriously, and I feel I think it's the city council's responsibility to see that the budget that we put into place is adhered to, and that it doesn't continue to go in the negative. And if that means a new program or whatever, that's something that is not the budget committee's responsibility or authority to do. Kevin?
Mr. Carson,
Yes.
so we talked earlier about the statute that requires this to be paid back next year, right? That it's it's basically, you can carry over the balance, but it has to be paid in the following year. Isn't that what the discussion was about?
No, if you make a loan on an operating budget, it has to be paid back in a year. But if you've got a deficit, you can literally run it indefinitely. I've been trying to think about how to portray this, and everybody understands that if you have money if you don't have money in the bank, you can't buy things. However, you can use credit cards all the time and just simply run up a bill and just pay the lowest payment, and that's what's allowed here under accounting law and budget law. I got it both from the auditor and from the state DOR, that Department of Revenue, that you can carry a deficit that's literally off budget, but it's still there. It's still an obligation to that fund as an accounting principle. They just don't allow you under state law to carry a negative in the beginning balance. For whatever reason, they don't do it. So yeah, they both told me that carrying from year to year a deficit, they think it's not a good budgetary practice, and they said it's not a good accounting practice, but it's perfectly legal.
Is there a percentage given?
No,
No percentage
No.
whatsoever?
nothing.
So just as a follow-up, doesn't there have to be your credit card example?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have an agreement with authority from the credit card company to borrow money from them. You don't
Mhm.
just spend the money and then say, well, charge that to Citibank
Mm-hmm.
and charge that to Bank of America. You actually have to have authority to borrow the money. There is no authority been given to borrow this money.
The
This
bank,
money, the money has been, we appropriated X amount of dollars to Fund 5. These monies were spent out of Fund 5 that weren't appropriated to Fund 5. They were spent out of other funds
Mm-hmm.
through Fund 5.
Agreed.
So they were misappropriated funds that were spent through this particular fund.
Well, if I would say, misappropriated, because that's a term of art, but yeah, basically,
They
they
weren't appropriated.
they went into-
They weren't appropriated to that fund, the monies that were spent. The
They-
$60,000 was never appropriated to Fund 5.
they went into a deficit and they shouldn't have. But I can't find anything in writing that says that that's illegal. And I've been told by the auditor, and I've been told by Department of Revenue that it's not illegal, that you can carry deficits.
And I have an answer for that, Kevin. I'd like to intervene just a second, because you've had dialogue back and forth a couple of times. If you were using a credit cards company, they would close you off and tell you no more credit. They would monitor your credit limit, and when you went over it, you would be told, and the card would be taken away from you. So, this whole thing has more than one side. And it wasn't just the failing of one department. And like I say, if it's a credit card, then you're monitored. Your use of that credit card is monitored by the credit card company. If you go over your balance, pretty soon you're not going to get credit anymore. And so I don't see that as being an example that applies in this situation. Have anything else?
I do.
Laura?
I think a credit card has a limit on it, and it
Yes.
seems to me, if I understand correctly, you were saying the fund had a limit on it, but it didn't matter, it went to buy other funds anyway.
And it was allowed to do so.
So it does work as an analogy, there was no cap, or it wasn't, the limits and the checks and balances were not appropriated, it didn't work.
No, it didn't work.
Well, there is a city resolution on this, but it's problematic in that the city resolution says that you can't make expenditures out of a fund that's not in the positive. And then it goes on to say that there is an exemption for department heads to write checks for anything for $1,000 and under, with irrespective of the deficit. And, I mean, basically, I think that's what's happened.
Does it say specifically irrespective of the deficit, or is that just assumed?
I can get it and read it for you. No, it's not assumed. It says, it wasn't even an emergency clause. It just says, however, here, you can't spend if you got a deficit. However, department heads can, that being Public Works, Fire, and Electric, can spend $1,000 per occurrence with no limitation. So I mean, basically, if it hadn't said that, then basically the minute the fund went into deficit, all spending would have stopped. But that's allowed, so that's the way it is.
I called some other municipalities and governments today and talked to some finance officers and department heads. And I learned that in most cases, as soon as even a line item is violated, they will be notified by their budget officer, their finance officer, and sometimes it can be considered as serious as to go to a commission or a council. This city has been run like this for literally decades. Now, we're trying to fix it. It's certainly not my intention to encourage over expenditures in departments, and I think that department should, in fact, pay for it. But we have already basically we've cut it down to a realistic point, I believe, with the last worksheet we were on. We've cut it down to a realistic point to where they are considerably, they do not have the leeway that they had. Now it takes supervision from the top side, from the finance officer, from the city administrator, and from the council to make this system work right. You can't put all the blame in one spot. There's plenty of blame to go around. Darlene?
Isn't it true that the fire department is still expending funds?
And that's what bothers
Is
me.
it true? Okay, and is it true, and now I heard, I don't know if it's true, that the water department asked to purchase some parts or something and was told no?
No.
That's not true?
Yeah, I did ask you a question too on the phone today. I'm wondering, has Jeff Richards acquired a new motorcycle?
No.
Because that's
That's
the rumor
it's
around
his,
town.
it's his personal motorcycle.
Oh,
But,
okay.
I mean, there was two ways to do this. One is to put the footnote in the beginning balance, But I also provided you with a way to guarantee it got paid, which was to allocate money that was set aside in contingency every year. I said 9,000 for 5 years, but guaranteed it got paid back, because the money would be put into contingency and held there and be untouchable in terms of the current deficit.
Kevin?
But what guarantee do we have that it won't just be overexpended again this year?
Well, the guarantee, I think, is exactly what Sandra said.
Monitoring.
You know, it's a new administration, it's a new council, it's a new budget committee, and it's gonna be a new city administrator who better get it straight, that it isn't gonna go in deficit, and as a council, it's your job to say, if this sucker goes in deficit, you need to look for another job.
Or put whatever safeguards are necessary to assure that the fund operates
Right.
openly and transparently and within its budget.
I think, I mean, it got to this situation because I don't think that there was the oversight that was necessary, and I'm not gonna name names, but I don't think it was there.
We have a motion on the floor to, it was to rescind this. Would you read Lance's motion again, please?
Budget Committee Member Masters made a motion to remove the line item on page 15 listed as deficit balance. And Eva second.
Everybody in favor of this action and restoring the funding that was in place, with the exception of the changes that we made to it previous to this action? Everybody in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Abstain.
So,
I'll abstain too. I'm on the fence.
No, I'm not on the
Still on
fence,
the
I'm
fence.
upset.
I'm thinking,
This is a moving target, Madam Chairman. We spent the better part of the last meeting talking about one issue, and this was it. And the information we had at that time said this was the right thing to do. All right?
it's
So
not
at
what
this-
I do. Yeah, I
And,
think there was
okay,
a-
today it's not the right thing to do.
No.
What's it gonna be tomorrow?
It didn't have anything to do with yesterday, today, or tomorrow. It had to do with a misunderstanding of what was going to happen.
Madam Chairman, you sit there and tell us about budget law time and time again. We've got an interim administrator that tells us about budget law time and time again. This is a moving target. It's very frustrating to go through hours and hours of debate just to have it tossed out the next meeting.
I think the
I
only,
abstain, thank you.
I think that the last 10 minutes of the last meeting is what we're talking about, Bobby. We're not talking about the hours of discussion beforehand. And I would also like to say that this is a legal option. It's not, yes, I talk about budget law, and if this were not a legal option, I wouldn't be, I thought, this is a miscommunication. I thought that we were holding, marking it, showing it, reflecting the negative balance. I did not know we were asking to take that $59,000 from this budget, leaving an operating capital of about $21,000 to operate the fire department on for a whole year. That was a misunderstanding.
Yeah. Madam Chairman, I believe that that was explained at a different time in the meeting. I'm not gonna sit here and I don't want people to think that I'm defending what was done. What I'm defending is that we're jumping to conclusions, and I believe that was explained to us by someone earlier in that meeting, that this was exactly what we were doing. I voted for it. I'm just as much to blame as anybody. But I'm operating on information that staff is giving to me at that time. And it would seem to me that that information changes and then changes again.
And it has, you're absolutely right. But this is, okay, go ahead, Shauna.
I would agree with you, Bobby. We have no subject matter expert in this room, and it's frustrating. I agree.
Lance,
Make a motion that we change the line item on page 14, listed as total personnel expense.
I thought we had a motion on the floor.
No,
Yeah, we just voted.
Yeah,
And it failed, right?
Did we take
The
the
motion-
consent?
I think it passed.
The motion passed.
Did it?
There was one no and two abstains. I mean,
Yeah.
just assumed.
Yeah, I'm only gonna do an abstain too, though.
You better
Okay,
go.
so let's do it.
So you can change the facility report.
Okay, we'll just do a roll.
Yeah.
Your roll call.
I see Meredith.
Okay, so what's the status now?
I would like more discussion.
Okay, let's have more discussion then.
Well, we had a
Okay.
vote. Could you declare the vote or do a roll call?
There are people that want to change their vote before I
Okay,
declare
we're
it.
gonna have a discussion and then change the vote, okay.
Okay, and Laura says she would like more discussion.
So I think, and I don't get all the ins and outs of all this, but just on the big picture thing, I think that my understanding of this is that before we had the new fire hall or the new chief or any of that, we ran a deficit anyway on our volunteer fire, old fire department. We always ran a little deficit. I don't know, this is what I was told. Nonetheless, this is what I was told, you can go from there. And then we hire somebody and we get this new, I don't think we can afford this fire department. I do not think the city can afford the fire department. I think that you have to get the levy like y'all talked about or something to this, and so we're gonna keep going around. And so I think that has to be addressed. What we're gonna do if we carry the fire department as is for another year by reinserting the $60,000 or what have you, giving them back their funding, fine. But we're probably gonna be building up more deficit because we can't afford this fire department.
We really haven't reinstated it for a year. It was cut with the previous action by $16,000 off the fire chief's position. Darlene?
She does have a good point as far as reinstating the revenue is gonna create further deficit because it's never been stopped.
So what do you
Mr. Carson
want to
just
do?
said, Mr. Carson just said that the expenditures are still continuing. So,
Isn't that up to the council to address that?
Yeah?
And isn't it up to us to make sure that we have put funding in place so it can be addressed? That's my point, is, you know, that's my point, is this,
I see the merit in.
this will not be able to be addressed unless we address it at this budget committee. And I just can't conscionably, without something being in place, I feel that this is the city council's responsibility and that they need to handle this. They need to either designate another plan or they need to straighten out the plan they have. Yes, Don?
Okay, then, to move on, if we put this $9,000, will that keep it going and that's legal?
Yes.
Why don't we do that?
What do you mean? I don't understand
Well, it was Mr. Carson's recommendation from Friday in a staff report to pay it off $9,000 a year for the next 5 years.
But not as a loan, you would buy down the accounting deficit $9,000 a year, but you put it into the $9,000 in the contingency, so you know it is there, it will be paid.
We could take the one that was done on the 6th, the last, before the $60,000 was taken out, and work from that, and probably budget out of the line items a certain amount of that debt and get a start on the debt. I'm not in favor of other departments bailing out this department. I never have been. I'm not in favor of it running in a deficit every year. Something needs to be done.
You've already got
But
it.
again, I don't feel I'm qualified to say this community does not need fire protection for the rest of the year. Yes, Darlene.
Could I ask a question of someone, perhaps Mr. Carson knows this? If we stick with just taking the 60,000 out of here and there's no funding left, is there any other option to fund if another fire department option came in? So is there, where could we fund if another option came in, say we wanted to partner with somebody or whatever? would we have, if we take this down to 21 or 26,000, is there any other option for funding to provide for fire and ambulance?
There's other organizational models, but I mean, basically, we'd have to explore it, the council would have to approve it, and then you'd have to go back and do a supplemental to achieve it, but
And
that's,
is that legal?
it's legal. Is it achievable?
The supplemental is not unless you find a new revenue source.
That's the question.
Because this is a foreseeable issue. We know we're gonna need fire protection in the next year.
But you don't know if you're gonna have a new organizational structure to finance it.
No, you don't, but you know it's gonna cost money if you do, and you're leaving no money in there to handle it. And-
That was the impression I got from the email back from Department of Revenue, was that you could do it.
No, you can't.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not gonna say,
So
I'm just saying I talked to them and that's what they told me.
council has directed staff to come back with other options. Therefore, I'm assuming that they're gonna be looking at other options. And if we reduce this down to 21,000, there's gonna have to be some other options looked at, right? Is that, am I making assumptions?
The council,
If we,
Council has to make that action.
if we foresee that there could possibly be a change in the department, some change, whatever council determines, then do we therefore have to budget for that now? Or can it be council action later? That's the question.
I made this presentation last night to the council about how you could do that, but the council took no action on it, and so at this point, it's just, it was a proposal I put forward to look at different options, to have consultants do it. They ended up talking more about doing a town hall than anything else, but there's no decision on doing anything.
I think that's my hang-up on this, is that before voting this out, like the motion has asked for, I would like to have something pending council to give us an answer by the next budget, so it's just not slipping through because it's such a pain to deal with. That we have some kind of policy in force, whether general fund is gonna fund this fire department, whether a levy is gonna fund this fire department, what we're gonna do with this fire department.
I agree.
If those options are viable.
I agree. And back to your comment about the town hall and other options, and hopefully there are other options that will be considered. You know, I think they should consider a lot of things, but most of those options are indeed gonna cost money, and we know that now. So it's our obligation to budget for that now. I'm not saying by putting this back in, that means that the status quo remains. I'm saying the money is there to do something with if you need it.
And I'm saying that historically, we've shown that apparently we haven't had a policy in place to guide us, and by next budget thing, I would like one.
Does anybody have the legal answer? Do we have to budget for that right now? Or can council, by resolution, supplemental budget, whatever, can they then budget for it?
For the deficit?
If there's a change. If we stick with the taking 60,000 out of this fund, and it cuts it down to what, 21 or 26,000, and another option comes in that requires revenue, what are the options? If we don't fund that option, what are the options? Can council,
Is
by
fire,
resolution, put more revenue into this department to pay for another fire option?
I think that you need to read what Rich gave me, which is the ORS's on.
Just like my question answered, can anybody answer
I
that?
can, and I've answered it a dozen
But I
times.
want staff to give me
Well,
an
maybe
answer
staff
when
doesn't
they-
know in this case. We have an
Then
ORS
I
right
would
here.
like that answer, I don't know.
The
We
sta-
have an ORS right here. The ORS knows.
Can you pass that down so I can make copies, please? The council can come back and or change the structure of the fire fund, but there's no guarantees. I mean, you could do an intergovernmental agreement with somebody like Hood River and save money on administration. You could create a fire district, which would levy new assessments. You could do a 5-year levy, operational levy. But all of those things are not up to the council to do solely. Somebody, either the voters or another organization has to agree to it. So you know, it's from my point of view, there's possibilities, but it's iffy, and the council does not have the sole jurisdiction to do it. They have this jurisdiction to say, why don't we do this, and then go out and talk to voters or talk to another organization or whatever, but they can't make that decision on their own and guarantee it.
And you can read the ORSs, but if you think needing fire services in the next fiscal year are foreseeable, this is the time to budget for them. Unless you can figure out a new source of revenue can trigger a supplemental anytime. Otherwise, you can only do a supplement for unforeseeable things according to the Oregon state statutes, and that's also what we learned.
So then you would say it'd be in better interest to the city for budget to fund even partially, like we had discussed, fund partially this so that there are some options. As we reduced the revenue by 16,000 and we reduced.
And I think we can reduce it by more if we scrutinize line items.
Does anybody else have anybody want to lend anything else?
Eva, did you have something to say?
I just wanted to go, I did misunderstand what the motion was. I thought that we were basically signifying somewhere in there that we were in
I
a
think
deficit.
that's what a lot of people
That's what I
thought.
understood, because I would not have voted to take $60,000.
It was
But
a
I did think
misunderstanding, Bobby.
And I did also think about the, I have a little note, and I should have spoke up and said,
Talking about taking this out,
like we've done on other things.
put in a
And then-
footnote.
This is just a comment here. Is it this committee's job, I understand there's a lot of frustration, but if we cripple the budget
Put in a footnote
on
in
this
here
so
that
badly,
says,
that there's absolutely no
this
recourse,
does
is
not
it
include the
right to
$60,000
cripple it so
deficit.
badly that we're
So it's a
forcing
footnote as opposed to a
council
line
or
item.
forcing the will? I mean, I
It's
understood
a
the
line
budget is
item that
supposed
wipes
to
out
be
60 grand.
about the whole picture. And if we cripple, completely cripple, because this would completely cripple it, how do you work with that? You can't. You gotta have something that's workable.
Well, that's the point, is
Well-
when, how are we gonna manage this fund, because it has not managed itself.
No, and it's not going to. It needs scrutiny from other directions.
So my recommendation would be that our recommendation be that we want something in effect that is a checks and balances for it.
Exactly.
But next year,
I
we want to do
understand
that.
what you're saying, but it's not, the budget's not managed.
Okay, hey, can you please carry on that conversation publicly there? With something of note, Lance?
Okay, well, the comment was made that this fund needs to be managed, and I was expressing my opinion
Sandra,
that the job of managing a fund,
it's
rests
explanation
with
about
staff
supplement.
rather than the budget committee.
And
I would agree with that.
saying that we have deficits that are addressed, and unfortunately, the budget committee has to deal with it.
But I think the discussion was along the lines, and I apologize for interrupting if I did, Eva, but I think what Eva was saying was, if the budget committee is attempting to cripple a fund so that it has to be managed in one way or another, again, my opinion is that it's not really the role of the budget committee to act in that manner. It's the job of staff to manage a budget. It's not the job of the budget committee to dictate how a fund is going to be managed.
We have been reminded time and time again that some things are strictly council policy. And I really can't see where funding out fire protection totally could be a budget policy. I believe this is the responsibility of the council. Kevin?
I keep hearing that we're taking money out of this fund. That's not what's happening. What we're voting to do is to ignore the fact that this fund has overspent itself. We're not cutting money out of this fund. The vote was to make this fund responsible for money it had already spent. Now, we're gonna take a vote and say, well, we're just gonna ignore that. We're gonna allow this to continue. No action's been taken by staff, council, or anything else. So, I mean, it would stand to reason that the same practices will continue, because no action's been taken by anybody to stop this. But that's okay. We're gonna actually take the negative money out of that fund by our action and just put it over here and just forget about it. That's what we're voting to do. We're not voting to cut any money out of the fire hall funding. They're getting 100% of the money that they got last year, 100% of what they got the year before, 100% of what they got the year before that. Tom was talking at the council meeting last night, he made a really good point. The dollars per thousand that we're dedicating to the fire hall is soon to exceed the entire property tax collected for the whole city. And we're adding to that. We're gonna add another $60,000 to that tonight. We're just gonna ignore it. We're gonna pretend like that money never got spent.
We didn't add $60,000, it's there as a deficit now. We're
not
not paying
funding
all the debt.
We're not
No.
funding it. We're ignoring an expended monies.
We're not paying all the debt in 1 year.
Involved in that.
It's not allowed.
I'd also like to mention that not only are we funding it 100% of what it's gotten, but Mr. Carson has raised the estimated property tax revenues into the general fund, and therefore are we going to actually give it even more money
I was
from those
told,
property taxes?
I asked that question to Rich today and I was told no. Rich?
If you look at the new budget on page 14, you'll see what happens is they lose, in order to cut the 60,000, we've essentially eliminated the fire chief position. We eliminate the fire chief position, we cut our ambulance revenues in half. It goes from 160 down to 80. So we are losing revenues. We have not increased, I have not increased the general fund contribution. It's the same as it was when, under the original budget.
And wouldn't you think I know you cut the revenues, but you didn't cut the revenues dramatically, and we have a lot less.
Well, the only one that was dramatic was the ambulance service fees, because there's no longer a paid person doing that.
Don?
This doesn't directly involve this, but it's going to come up pretty soon, and I think we better keep it in the back of our mind. I asked, I believe it was in January, I asked for a report on this 9/11 project. But it's June now, I haven't received it yet, and I think you were gonna try to get it for me. As of yesterday, we haven't received our $35,000 from the county, and we don't even know what our long-term liabilities are on that project. And I did ask for those, we haven't got it yet.
The dollar amount's 38, and I got a phone call into the Hood River County Administrator today just to make sure that
I
everything's
asked for a report in
track.
January, we haven't got it yet, not one thing.
Karen?
We have a motion on the floor, can we stay on topic and get this motion? We had a call for a vote, we've had lots of discussion. Usually when you call for a vote, you're done with discussion. So I was hoping we could get back to the vote.
I think we're talking about the revenue that could impact this, and that's an important topic to discuss. I did talk to the 911 commander about the $38,000 that was supposed to be coming into this department. And she says there are no guarantees on that $38,000. It goes to a vote of a board, right? It goes to a vote?
Mary Ann?
The 38,000 is for a grant. It has nothing to do with Department Fund 5. It's a grant.
It's revenue coming into that department.
No,
It's
it
a
isn't.
grant.
No,
It's part of a grant.
let me answer it. The money that pays the 911 system is run by a 911 district. We may have a radio, and somebody else may have a radio, but it's run by the 911 district that has its own taxing authority. It was paid through for a grant where all the partners, which are different fire departments, county, different cities, are obligated, I won't use the word obligated, said through an MOU that they would pay their fair share. Everybody's paid their fair share, but the county towards the grant. It has nothing to do with this department in terms of money in and money out.
According to what the sheriff told me, someone will have to pay that $38,000, because it ends up with the contract.
Bobby, did you have something?
Actually, to agree with Don, is when Jeff explained that to us to begin with, and then the sheriff came down, it was pretty well understood that any unpaid fees would be the responsibility responsibility of the city of Cascade Lock because it had been the grantee. Is that
Right,
it? Okay.
right.
And I think that's where the concern is, that if the county does not, for whatever reason, pay that, then we're gonna be liable for it.
Needs to pay it.
In my discussions with the sheriff, the head of 911, over in Hood River, and the county administrator, the sheriff basically said that he was much more comfortable with the 911 system than he was when it initially started. When it initially started, it got off to a rocky start for a number of reasons, not only to bother with, but that he was comfortable the system was going to work and that they were going to run it and operate it. Now, there may be some things that they want to close out the system, information, whatever, which is something we just work through.
It wasn't my intention to open up an hour discussion. It was my intention to revisit this because I felt people hadn't understood what they had voted on, not to rehash it. That's the only reason. And so now that everybody understands what the ramifications are, I think we need to vote on it. Everybody understands now what the impacts of this will
We
be.
did vote.
We did vote.
Okay,
It was just
and-
what you told me was, I wasn't allowed to make another motion because you hadn't announced the vote, and we wanted to have a discussion so that if people wanted to change their
Okay, so
vote.
what was the vote? Because I had people, before I said it, changing their votes.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
we need a roll call on
There
the
you go.
vote.
You want to revote?
So
Yes,
roll call.
please, a roll call vote.
Budget Committee Member George Fisher?
Uh,
Would you like me to-
Could you state the motion, please?
Sure. Budget Committee Member Masters made a motion. Pardon me, I found it.
I can restate it. I made a motion to remove the line item listed as deficit balance from page 15.
Budget Committee Member Fisher?
No.
Budget Committee Member Laura Fisher?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Lance Masters?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Tiffany Pruitt?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Tom Cramblett?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Sandra Kelly?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Kevin Benson?
No.
Budget Committee Member Eva Zerke?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Darlene Solinger?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Shauna Hazel?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Karen Seid?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Guida Hay?
Yes, with the provision the staff gives us alternatives.
We can add that later.
Budget Committee Member Bobby Walker?
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Don Hay?
Yes.
That motion passes. Okay, now we need to, Tiffany?
I want to make a motion to put the note, I don't know if we need to make a motion, but put the note of the deficit, that it will be at the end of this budget year after the beginning balance. Have it, that footnote that you reflected, that you.
Yeah, the one I said was in parentheses,
That reflects
Yeah.
the real status of the account.
I said does not reflect $60,000 deficit. You could just say does not reflect fund deficit or just deficit.
I would like a number, I would like a
Right.
value, I would like a monetary value of
Well,
whatever
the one-
it actually is at the
Okay.
end of.
The
June.
projected balance with monies that have come in and the monies we expect to come in or not is $45,000. That's by the June 30th, what we see the deficit position being.
Is that realistic? Because a lot of the other suppositions have not been.
Well,
We
it's,
need a
it's,
realistic number.
yes, it's as realistic as we can get, given that we've got a couple weeks left in the month.
Eva?
I thought that what we talked about is putting the actual amount, and then it might came in the next year, you know, whatever goes in the next year. You know what I mean?
Or-
Kevin's proposal was to put in the actual amount at the day of adoption, as far as we'd gotten. So if you want to say, does not reflect blank deficit, we will fill in the number on the day it goes to council.
Is that your motion? Jim?
Yes.
Second.
Everybody in favor, please say aye. Everybody opposed, please say
Opposed.
aye.
Aye.
2 opposed, the motion carries. Now is what, I would like to do, because we haven't done it, is go back to the budget that we were presented on 6/8. We made some changes to that budget. The changes that we made were we reduced revenue to what we felt was a realistic point of $110,000 from 126. And we took that $16,000 deficit from the personnel expense portion of the fund.
Correct.
Now, that's an action that was done and approved, but we have not scrutinized any of the other line items. Well, maybe a few of them, but I think that we have some money in here that can be saved. There's still contract service, volunteer association, $3,000. I think that's a lot considering our financial situation. I think awards, $600. I think that could be a lot less or nothing at all. There are line items here that could be cut and applied to this deficit. And does anybody have any suggestions? Because we have scrutinized line items in every department. And I want also, if this committee agrees, to scrutinize the line items in this department, other than just the revenues and the fire chief's position. Yes, Eva.
You had brought up the thing about the $3,000 for the volunteers. I want to give a little bit of history on that. That was a negotiated amount with Willoughby, because what they did is the volunteers used to be paid hourly when they went out on calls, which also left them subject to, unemployment. If people weren't working, they had to list it down as unemployment and FICA and all those things. So they came up with this amount of money that would be just a contracted amount, and it was a negotiated amount at that point in time. That was quite a few years back, and the volunteers have never asked for more money because of the
Plus his job.
the state of the budget. So before you would consider taking money away from there, I would think that you'd probably want to talk to volunteers, because it would be their understanding. I don't know if there's still a contract in place. I don't know.
I personally feel it's way past the point of talking to the volunteers, and you need to take this in hand. And it's time for everybody to share in the sacrifice that every single fund has been making for years. Laura?
Well, Jeff was here and he reduced his paycheck by that much on the days that he was here.
There are places we can save money in this fund. Either we're going to save it or we're not. Does anybody have any suggestions on line items, how we could save any money? Darlene?
Well, just for a start, utilities, I think that we never had so many lights turned on in the old fire hall. Why do we have so many lights turned on in this one? And they've increased the utilities from 9,000 to 10,183, and I'd say take it back down maybe to 8,000 and tell them to turn the lights on.
One night.
Sherelle?
I just wanted to make a statement that that's for the new fire hall and the old fire hall and the modular building behind the old fire hall to keep utilities going. It's not just for one building.
Rich?
There are some possible recommended cuts in the new budget because we were anticipating the loss of $60,000. If you want to look and see what the fire chief was thinking, then you might want to look at the new budget and see, and look at some of those line items.
You just hand it out.
Yes.
What page is it?
Page 15.
Well, it's 14.
14, 15.
Starts at 14.
Oh, 14 and 15.
Now, there are some things that are different because we will change we would change the fire chief's salary to be minus the 16, like Darlene asked. We would change, put the number back up to 110, which was, it was 160. I had it at 126. She cut 16, so 110. But if you look over the next page, you can see some ideas on cuts to material and services that he thought about.
And I see the $3,000 has been cut.
Yes.
And I'm not suggesting that it be cut totally. Other people might have thoughts about that. I just think that this has to be a shared sacrifice. And there has to be a goodwill attempt to start paying back this debt, because as Kevin says, it's certainly not my intent to have this debt sitting there or absorbed by other parts of our funds. Darlene?
Well, it's been said that we reduced fire chief wages by 50%, but we only reduced it by 21%, so we could look at reducing that down to 50%. That would be a reduction.
Yeah, I think the vote, the last meeting was 16,000 out of revenue, 16,000 out of personal services, which is salary. That's as much as we got.
The old fund thing, that is done on the 8th, 6/8, it doesn't reflect the, does this new one on page 14 or 15, does that reflect the bill for the fire truck?
Yeah.
It's back in, interfund transfers,
On page 16.
page 16.
And that's, just by reference, I produced a memo for everybody for later on that lists everything that I could think of that you said you wanted. And those transfers are in there and they're in here. This budget reflects everything we think you told us to do. So it should bring it, other than this 60,000, it should be, everything is balanced and everything is up to date.
Lance?
I just wanted to comment, the idea of cutting the salary again, we didn't address it the last time, and I think that it was reflected by staff when they took the salary out completely. That has an impact on revenue. And so if you're gonna reduce it even more, then you have to reduce the revenue even more, and your budget's out of balance again. I don't think anyone in this room has the expertise to know exactly how those kinds of reductions are going to impact revenue. So maybe I'm wrong if you have the idea how to do it.
Well, what she proposed was a reduction, an exact reduction in revenue and in salary.
And yet,
Now-
when you took 60, or actually
Yeah.
30,000 out, you reduced it by half rather than.
Well, we took out more than that. We took out, the entire salary we took out was $81,000, and the amount of revenue we took out was $80,000. So I would say it was, that's a dollar for dollar. And that's what the chief proposed.
June 8th budget, it's 49,000 for salary.
59.
That's 49.
Well, what I'm saying is, her proposal was a dollar for dollar change. As it turned out, when the fire chief looked at this, he came up with a dollar for dollar change. So I think that the 16 and 16 is perfectly
I don't
valid.
see how that's a dollar for dollar. You take out 49,000 in salary, and then you take out 80,000 in revenue. I don't see that as dollar for dollar.
Well, I don't understand it then. With the 49, you had to add everything in there.
Well, this new paper, if we've reinstated the
Even if it was 60,000, it's not dollar for dollar.
$60,000, it really has nothing to do with reality anymore.
Right.
And if we look at the old one on 6/8, it's a more realistic approach before the 60,000 has been taken out. The problem being that we made some changes, and the one change is a fairly simple change. That's a strict $16,000 off of one place and off of the other. But the other change that we made that wasn't reflected in this is, in this one, the interfund interest payment of $12,400 is reflected, and the fire engine interfund interest payment for $310 is reflected. And those are expenses that no longer apply. That will be replaced with the fire truck payment of $2,400 and something. And that leaves a large excess right there, $10,000 actually, that we could apply towards the deficit. Yes, yes, Lance?
I'm sorry, I'm not responding to what you're saying, I'm just
It's
going.
on page 3.
No, I'm not, my comment doesn't respond to that, but I encourage you to move on to that after my comment. Going back to, the salary, basically the way, I'm just gonna try again here. We said on June 8th, after Jeff voluntarily took a pay cut, at a full-time fire chief position, that we didn't believe that, a revenue of $126,000 was realistic. And so we cut that revenue down to what other people on the budget committee thought was realistic.
110.
Okay, but that didn't change our expectation that the fire chief would be working less hours. All right, but when you make a more drastic cut to compensation for a fire chief, you have to realistically assume the fire chief's not going to be answering as many calls. Okay, so therefore, if he's not going to be answering as many calls, there's not going to be the same revenue. You have to further reduce the revenue if you're going to be realistic.
That would be the ramifications of a further reduction of the
But we
staff.
never did that. We just did a dollar for dollar
Clarification.
because we wanted to balance it out.
Okay, clarification. What was the more drastic? They cut $16,000 out of personal services. What's the more drastic cut?
That, the $16,000 out of personal services is in addition to $4,500 that he voluntarily took.
I don't remember that happening.
I think under
It's
the
right here. The
circumstances.
budget, the document that you gave us shows that he's taken
No, the question,
$4,500 cut to his salary.
but
Then we added on $16,000 to that.
What
But we didn't address what would happen to revenue.
what I'm saying is, I don't remember you ever voting on that. You voted on the 16, but I don't remember anybody voting on the other one. We just presented it. And it was never raised.
When you look at the total, yeah, if it's a $16,000 cut though, what you're looking at is a reduction in
$16,000.
in either hours or length of the year that position
Sure.
can be funded. So we haven't addressed what the impact would be on revenue.
And what I'm saying is, I think that the $16,000 cut in salary and is reflective of the $16,000 cut in revenue, that would be the relationship.
Darlene.
And if you're talking about cutting it further though, we
But I'm not.
That's
Well,
enough, that's enough,
it's been brought up.
enough, Lance.
I think
It's
I can
somebody else's
clarify.
turn now.
I made the motion, and I was told to make the motion from the $75,244 of total personnel expense. And that's what the motion was, and that's what we voted on and passed. And that reduced it by $22,387, with a total of $59,244. And those numbers were read into the record when we did that. And so, and then we heard that we cut him by 50%, but it's actually 21%.
I
There
believe
still
that,
hasn't, no, it didn't help, there still hasn't been, an assessment of what that does to overall revenue. Particularly if one of the suggestions we're taking tonight is to do a further cut to salary.
we're not budgeting for the whole year here. We're budgeting until the council can handle some problems and find a solution. Either a new revenue or a reduction in services. It's not up to us to make those decisions, but I don't feel we have to cover a whole year's worth of expenses when we're doing this. As far as the fire chief's current salary, if there's new revenues, then they could be restored. Darlene?
I just wanted to add too, that it hasn't been brought up, but, the budget committee also, and the council, gave, $50,000-$60,000 to this department by covering the $450,000 loan. So that's also money that the city's paying for this department for the loan of the fire hall. So let's not forget that either. 100% funded this department, we didn't cut any of the revenues that the city puts in, plus we added $50,000 for payments on a fire hall that was built 3 years ago.
Okay, Darlene has made a motion. Is there a second on that motion?
What's the motion?
Oh, wasn't a motion? Okay, that's just as good. I would like to consider other line items as well. I don't know why we're only looking at one line item when there are others we could consider along with it. Lance?
I have to object to the idea that we're not budgeting for the entire fiscal year. This is a budget for, it's a worksheet, fiscal year 11-12, so I do believe we're budgeting for the entire year. Thank you.
Quite frankly, I think that, that we restored the $60,000, which made the dramatic chop that everybody was complaining about. It was a mistake, that's why it was restored. It was never intended to do anyway. And I think all things are on the table for the reduction of expenses in this account. And that when we could still reasonably expect that we would have enough money to keep this department running. And the council will have to consider alternatives, either that or a shortened schedule. How many services can be performed for a certain amount of money? I think that's a real important question. Bobby brought that up the other day. Are we all over the map? Are we trying to accomplish too much? Are we being reimbursed for what we are accomplishing? Is our equipment replacement being even considered? It isn't in here. There's nothing to say for equipment. We have heavy depreciation on our equipment every single year. And there's nothing in here to ensure replacement on this equipment once it's worn out. And so unless we're getting revenues for these, I think everything needs to be considered at this point. And I'm not for leaving this fund broke so it can't operate for a year, but I'm not for giving it free rein to operate as always either. And so, if Jeff has made suggestions on line item deductions, those are on page 14 of what Rich presented you.
15.
Or 15, 14, 15, and 14 and 15, I guess. If anybody would like to transfer that over to the worksheet that we're working on now to reduce this fund and service this debt right now, if we can, to an extent. Now, I did find, like I say, $10,000. If you look on page 3 of the papers that were given to you on 6/8, you'll see $12,400 budgeted and $310 budgeted. That, at $2,400, and those are both budgeted for issues for the fire station on that worksheet. And that is, they're not paying the interest on the fire station, and they're not paying interest on the fire engine interfund loan. Now, this is 6/8, page 3, interfund transfers.
This one.
Okay, that's changed now to 2,400 and,
And this is redone.
You're in the general fund. She's talking about this on page 3.
6/8. Did anybody find what I'm looking at, the interfund transfers?
I found it, Sandy.
Okay.
But if you look at the new one, it's not.
No, it isn't, but that's what the $60,000 gone. And the new budget has the correct amount in there, which is what we voted on last week, was to charge the fire engine to that department. So that's not reflected in this budget paper of 6/8. Instead, the $12,400 and $310 is reflected.
The later budget of 610 and this budget shows that it is being recommended at 2,459. The 12,400 was taken out. Yeah, you were looking at the proposed, and that wasn't,
610, I never got anything on 610.
The state package standard has parentheses around that 12.4, so that's a negative. That's an account.
where's the new one?
I don't know where you're looking. I've never was given a budget paper with the date 610 on it.
Madam Chair, that's when I printed mine out. It was not when you got yours.
Okay.
Okay, that's my date when I printed it.
And so this is the 614 one we're talking about?
Yes.
Yes, and you can see that it's, the recommendation is 2,459, not 12,000.
Oh, here it is.
Correct, but this is the budget with $60,000 removed from it, correct?
I was just talking about the line, this line item. That's
Well,
all.
I understand that, but we have to have something we can work with.
And the best thing to work with is this document on page 15 that lists all of the material and services with the recommendations from the fire chief about where he could take cuts and survive. Page 14, revenue and personal services you dealt with. Page 16 goes into capital outlays, and quite frankly, I would rather keep the capital outlays in there because I think they need them if you look at the bunker gear, medical equipment. So the best place to look is page 15, which is material and services.
Well, what was it? You presented us a balanced budget on 6/8, okay? Now, we made changes to that budget. Now, we basically have gone back to that point A. And so,
That's it. The only ones on on that date, 6/8, the only changes we had was Darlene's on 16 out of revenue, 16 out of expenditures.
that's right,
That's all we did.
that's right. But all of the, before the $60,000 were taken out, all of the line items are balanced, correct? Now, in order to do this, when we do go back and put in every single line item that you took out, because we just put the $60,000 back, so why can't we go back to the document that had it in it?
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the changes made on page 15 of what Mr. Carson gave us tonight, with the exception of the deficit balance of $60,000. The reductions that Fire Chief Pritchard went through and made from materials and services, that's my motion to accept those reductions.
And where are you gonna put the money?
Contingency.
Into the debt, correct?
Yes.
Doesn't,
Yes.
doesn't
And
go
into
to,
the debt.
doesn't go to contingency?
To be applied to the
So that it
$60,000
gets applied.
of expenditures.
For now, you could put it in contingency, yeah.
I'll second that
I need to
motion.
restate.
Do we know what the total amount there? It seems like it'd be helpful to know. I mean, I was trying to do the math, just comparing 6/8 and 6/14, but
It says
You might not wanna change the deficit, the uncollectible accounts amount either to that, to 25.6, that's based on a lesser revenue.
Yeah,
Projection.
I would agree that,
I'll amend my motion to accept the changes made on page 15, accept the deficit balance of $60,000 and the uncollectible accounts of $25,600.
and move that to contingency.
And for that to be applied to the current deficit.
Okay, let's count how much money it is, so we know precisely.
It'll be the same 51,200. We're just not accepting the new proposal.
Question, Laura?
If you move it to pay off the $60,000 debt, what does that mean? Who gets it? General fund?
Yes, the same place it is being spent out of. And so there's how much money is there?
I'm counting, it's 12,200, up until the gasoline line, I haven't gone past that. But then I think that, you gotta be careful there, because it looks like on the contract services Springfield billing, there's been a cut of 2,000, but I would have to assume that's been cut because
Of the
we're assuming our revenues are being cut, so it wouldn't be fair to make that cut if now we're going to have a fire
We
chief.
do have to be really careful, so let's pull out the expenses that will maybe not be lowered because we have a higher, okay.
We've been told that we're gonna get less revenue, have less billings because we cut this position down, so.
We
Why
saw,
wouldn't we also expect that there would be less cost of doing the billing?
we haven't adjusted that number.
Richard?
I think the way that she originally stated it in the negative would still work, and you could basically say that you accept all of the fire chief's recommendations for reductions, except Springfield, the contract service for Springfield, except for the 60,000, and except for the uncollectible accounts change.
Okay, and,
Well, what about vehicle maintenance? Is that?
and reinstill all of the revenues that had been projected back up to what, 120? No, we reduced it to 110.
I think if you give this, if you make the motion on those three, we will take the other ones out, and whatever the number is,
It's 19,000.
then, okay, whatever the number, well, let's don't use the number though, that scares me. Because it gets in the record. Whatever the number is, will go into contingency to pay back the debt. Unless you want to show it as a transfer to the general fund. But that,
Want to show it for a payback of the debt, and so the negative balance is less at the
Deficit.
beginning of the year.
deficit, right, so I mean,
Not the debt, the
The
deficit.
deficit.
yeah.
For now, I think it would be good to put it into contingency, because what that does, everything balances, and I don't have to go back, we don't have to go, go back and rework everything.
Right.
I think ultimately, while it may take longer, we're gonna be more comfortable if we look at just read down each of those, figure out what the dollar amount savings would be. Because I think if you start analyzing it, it's like, well, equipment, vehicle maintenance, paying less for that would make sense if you're not going out on calls. But if if you look at a different plan where you are going out on calls, there wasn't a cut to vehicle maintenance. So, if you just take the time, if we just shots and physicals, are we comfortable cutting that to 0 and then move down? That would be you as the chair, just
Okay,
cutting those
I
out.
would be willing to do that if we didn't have a huge hour-long argument on every single line item. We're gonna have to move it along or do it in one lump.
The question is just, is this a cut that was made because of not going out on calls? It doesn't have to be a discussion about whether we want to keep it or not.
Darlene?
Well, it shows that Springfield billing already through January 31st has spent $2,508, and so if we only budget what the recommended 2,000 there, it's already over $508, so that's, right? Am I looking at that correctly?
No, it was a $2,000 savings. It was, no, wait.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they want to put 2,000 in there, but they've already spent $2,508, so we're gonna have to boost that one up. So
No,
just-
it's at 7,000. The recommended amount is at 7,000. No? Oh, where is that?
We're on the new one that they
Okay,
gave
okay,
us tonight.
okay. Okay, well, that's obviously not high enough, and like Lance says, that's going to be affected if there are more calls in the emergency equipment. And a lot depends on when council takes action on this and what's done, if there's another system in place or not. Rich?
Okay. I think that the two items that you talked about, the 60,000, we already did the 60,000, so the uncollectibles, beyond that, I think what I'd like to do is sit down with the fire chief based on his new status and work through the numbers and come up with a better set of numbers and do it tomorrow.
Then let's give them a number that we want to save.
Yeah, give me a target to allocate to,
We
beyond,
do have a motion on the floor at the moment.
Okay, and the motion is?
There was a motion by Darlene.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking over here, sorry. Budget committee member Solinger made a motion to accept the fire chief's recommendations excluding Springfield uncollectible accounts under deficit line items in materials and services.
And the uncollectible accounts. Okay.
More discussion?
This is a quick question for Greg.
Okay.
Do we have time to do that? I mean, I agree with you, that's a great idea, but it just felt like we were really trying to get things done tonight because
well,
public hearing.
if,
No, it's
That's-
not a public hearing, it's a
comment.
comment.
But
Okay.
you could do it, the other way to do it is basically, you know, change the collectibles and basically, on all the other line items, give me a target and just basically say, look, this is how much we want to cut out of material and services here, and I can do that tomorrow. And it'll be your number, it'll come out of here, it'll go into contingency, and I tell you the truth, if we can hit the number, I don't really think you care what line item it's coming out of, because it's his best guess. And he knows better than me or anybody in the room. So give me, just change the uncollectibles and give me a number.
Sandra?
Yes, Lance?
Is 9,000 the target based on your memo from June 8th? I think that's a reasonable target, and it certainly seems achievable based on what you gave us tonight.
The number was 45,000, depending on how fast or slow you wanted to do it. If you wanted to do it over 3 years, it was obviously 15,000. If it was 5 years, it was 9,000. So it just depends on what you want to
I
do.
think
The
9,000 is a
object
good
is to
number.
do it as fast as possible. Darlene?
I made the motion and there's a second, and I'd like to stick with the motion in consensus of time.
I'm sorry, I didn't get a second.
I did.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody in favor of accepting how Jeff has this written, with the exception of the deficit balance and the uncollectible accounts
And Springfield.
Yes.
and Springfield billing? Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Everybody opposed, please say aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Budget committee member George Fisher?
Aye.
Budget committee member Laura Fisher?
Aye.
Budget committee member Lance Masters?
Opposed?
Budget committee member Tiffany Pruitt?
Yes.
Budget committee member Tom Cranlett?
Yes.
Budget committee member Sandra Kelly?
Yes.
Budget committee member Kevin Benson?
Yes.
Budget committee member Eva Zerke?
Opposed.
Budget committee member Darlene Solinger?
Yes.
Budget committee member Shauna Hazel?
Opposed.
Budget committee member Karen Stein?
Opposed.
Motion passes.
We're not done yet.
No?
Well,
I haven't finished roll call.
Budget committee member Guy Haight?
Sorry,
Yes.
Canada. You still have to fill up the wagon here.
I'm out there, Guy, I'm sorry, you're hitting.
No, that's okay. And
Budget committee member Don Haight?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now it passes. Thank you, Tiffany. Okay. Now, can we designate that, please, by motion, to be paid towards the deficit in that account?
I'll make a motion that we apply those changes from page 15 to the deficit in Fund 5.
A second?
Second.
okay, but I was just wondering, is that 5 years or 3 years?
It's as fast as
This year.
possible.
It's,
Well,
It's
but-
now.
But for, right this minute,
Now.
okay, all right, sorry.
Okay,
Laura?
and so my question's kind of the same thing. Will it be tracked? How will you know if it's going back to water or who or the general fund or whatever? So they'll just track it.
Goes back to the
Should
general
be
fund.
recorded in this meeting, these meeting minutes.
Okay, so I'm just-
it's a good capital reserve.
Where?
We all agree they need to be tracked,
Go there.
and so this doesn't continue to cause problems. Okay, so we've taken care of that. Is there anything else before these papers are brought back to us for the final time that
We
we
didn't vote.
want
We
to.
didn't vote.
We didn't vote.
Oh, we didn't vote,
No.
I'm sorry. Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Wait. Let's start back over, please. I don't,
Budget Committee Member Solinger made a motion to designate, the money from those changes that were made in the previous motion towards the deficit in Fund 5. And Don second.
Okay, everybody in favor, the discussion's over, everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Everybody opposed, please say aye.
Opposed?
Do you need a roll call?
I got Syke, Hazel, and, Lance Masters? Is that
And
correct?
me.
Oh, and, thank you.
Motion passes. Is there, yes, Rich?
Okay, well, I'm going to make an attempt to get you through the process. I included a memo with the new budget. The only changes that we've made so far were in the fire fund where we had a problem, but everywhere else, it's balanced. All the funds are balanced. And I think what this memo reflects is everything that I've heard from the council, the budget committee, and staff recommendations. So the question is, first off, is everything that you wanted in here? Did I miss something, or did I misstate something?
Has the 10% reduction been made to administration, and what did you do with the monies?
Yes, that's on here, that's item 7, the 10% personal services, material and services were taken out of Department 21 and moved back to general fund. In other words, now the general fund is supporting all those positions in terms of that 10%, and not the street fund, not the water fund, not the sewer fund.
It was to cut it, not to move it, was the idea.
Okay, then the problem with that is going to be,
It needs to be cut.
well, if that's fine. If it's cut, then essentially that means everybody got a staff cut in their salary.
However you want to handle it, I don't
No,
think
I-
that's been decided by council.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, That's
I mean,
council's
postage,
decision.
There's all that stuff in admin, not necessarily, I mean,
And I think we had a discussion before,
Between computers.
that could come down
So is that
as
right?
furlough days, that could come down as a half a position, that could come down as a number of ways, but, you've made no cuts to administration at all.
Okay,
We
then.
asked for a 10% across the board cut.
Okay, that's just this point of clarification for me. We did make the 10% cuts in the funds that you asked them to make. So if you want me to reflect
We want
that,
it across the 10% cut out of this budget,
okay, we can do that.
okay? And so, but all of the other funds are balanced now, correct?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I just need to go back and look at what that number is and compensate for that, and I assume you would let me do that.
The purpose of the 10% cut is to, I believe, get the city headed in the right direction and acknowledge the fact that administration costs are going up dramatically every year, whether it's due to the computer or other reasons, and they need to start being kept intact.
Okay, well, in terms of the motion, I didn't understand that, because I thought you just wanted to get the administration out of the funds so that they had more of their own money.
Is that what your motion meant? Maybe it's another misunderstanding.
Is it an
Darlene,
amendment?
could you, that's not what you intended, is it?
I intended a 10% reduction of administrative costs of materials and services and personnel in each fund that administrative is in.
Department,
Do you want that 10% transferred
Taken
to
out of-
someplace else or reduced?
well, she wanted it out of Department 21.
I wanted it reduced, I didn't want those funds to have that expense.
And they don't,
So I wanted
yeah.
them to use that, to be able to use that revenue in their fund.
Right, that's what we did.
Okay, so the way it is, the way Rich interpreted that, is that there has been no reduction in administrative costs as a whole. They've just, the burden of paying for them has been transferred to the general fund.
No.
That's not what we intended.
No.
I'm sure that we intended to reduce the administrative cost in this budget by 10%.
We talked about,
Cannibalism.
Yes, Darlene?
we had talked about building stability in those funds and leaving that revenue in there for those funds to have more stability, so
Right.
that they had,
Right.
they could buy more materials and
Right.
services themselves.
And that's what we did.
So to cut that 10% expenditure and move it into their revenue.
Right,
Okay.
that's what we did.
Okay, and were you intending for the expense of that 10% to be borne by the general fund? Or were you thinking there would be a 10% reduction?
Reduction of administration. Yes,
Exactly.
not out of the general fund. We've been cutting the general fund already to fund a $450,000 fire hall.
The general fund and then administration are synonymous. If you cut administration, you cut the general fund. There's no two ways about it.
You just said you transferred the 10% to the general fund.
I mean-
That's what you told us.
No. What I said was, we kept the salaries of the employees in the general fund intact and had to pick up the difference through the general fund. So they're getting the same amount of money, but the general fund's taking a hit to compensate so that the different
So there has
funds.
been no overall reduction in the cost of administration.
Yeah, well, no.
That
There's
was
been,
not what it said.
there's been no overall reduction in the salaries and benefits of the staff, but we have to compensate for it in the general fund and other places like material and services, in reserves, and we've done that. We've eliminated the capital reserves for that reason. I mean, we have compensated and taken the hit.
No.
Okay.
That was not the intent of the motion, and I think that's council action. I don't think that's staff action. I think that's council action to decide, to determine when that administration is cut by 10%, then they make the recommendation to staff as to where those expenditures will come out of. I think that's your
I
response.
agree, because if you're going to reduce staff salary, that's the council's job. So that's fine, that's a discussion.
And we did have a lengthy discussion about various options like furlough days, Bobby mentioned. Another person mentioned making a full-time person to a half. There are all kinds of
Yeah.
potentials, but that's not our business.
And at this point, like I said, the funds are balanced, we took the monies out as she asked, and then I think it would be the prerogative of the budget committee to recommend to the council to make a decision in the general fund if they want to take it out of salary or if they want to take it out of M&S. Because salary is what they, personal services and salary is what they're responsible for. So you can just leave it as is, pass it along to them, because I don't think, I'll be direct about it. I don't know that you can tell me as a budget committee to cut people's salaries.
We're not.
We
We're
didn't.
telling you to cut the cost of administration.
And I did.
Well, we can tell you that.
No, I'm saying I did cut. I did cut administration.
Lance, you had your hand up.
Well, I mean, maybe it's already been made, but I think that it's maybe a reach. I don't think it's appropriate for a budget committee to make salary cuts. I think that the idea of cutting Department 21 is fine, but it really does rest with the council whether or not to reduce people's salaries. And we had some of those discussions, but about furlough days or people that have contracts that are binding on the city and so on, but it's not up to this committee to make those decisions.
Was anybody confused about their vote? If nobody was confused about the vote,
I wasn't confused about my vote.
okay, anybody here feel they didn't understand what we were voting on? My understanding of what we voted on, would you agree, Darlene, is that we cut the costs of administration by 10%?
Exactly.
And with the
No.
exception of contract services.
Administration is everything in every fund. You cut the cost in streets, water, and sewer by 10% for personal services and 10% in material and services. Now, that has an impact on administration and general fund, but you didn't cut the entire general fund by
Yes,
10.
That's what the whole across the board motion
Well,
was, across the board.
okay.
That meant every every fund or department that had administrative 21
Right.
costs in it.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Every fund that has administration in it was cut.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
That's what we did.
And they deferred the
You're just saying that you
expense.
didn't take it out of general fund, but there's administration in the general fund. You said you
There
only
is
took
no-
it out of
there-
street, water,
There is no
sewer, and
Department 21.
Yeah, it's 5.
No,
And there's also 21 in travel and training in the planning, right? We had that discussion, that there was administrative costs of travel and
They're
training
weak throughout the budget.
well, I understand. If
planning
we,
and in alternate. And so the motion was a 10% reduction of all administration.
not Department 21?
With the exception,
I think she means 21 is administration to
But,
us,
uh,
for synonymous.
Okay, but I'm just
and we
saying,
did ask to have it consolidated at one
The
point
vote
during the
was-
process.
the vote was on Department 21. No matter what was intended, the vote was on Department 21. And we've done that.
Tiffany,
And that means that each department now has 10% more revenue.
Yes.
and
Can we
the,
take a break?
and the difference is borne by the general fund, correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break.
Thirsty.
This is like Chinese culture.
And staff and make sure that,
You know, I'm not sure I got a copy of that memo.
Yeah, I handed it to you, it's here.
Coming to you.
it's coming. And everything that's on this list is reflected in the new budget and the new budget's balance. So the question is there something that shouldn't be here? Or did we overlook something? Because we've taken care of everything that we know of.
Well, Laura and I were actually trying to go through the minutes. She started at one end and I started at the other to try to mark everything that we've changed. And I got waylaid with this other thing and was not able to finish my project. So could everybody look over this memorandum by, from Richard and see if, and kind of go through their original budget papers, if you have them, and we can see if anything has been forgotten or overlooked. The things that we have on here are general fund repayment of city light work done for CCHC. Number 2, general fund balance SDC payment to capital reserve. Number 3, general fund repayment of the old fire station. Number 4, general fund eliminated economic development expenditure. General fund eliminated capital reserve for building improvements. Number 6, general fund, reduction of planning fees and planning engineering estimate revenues to $40,000 each, and similar reduction in expenditures. Number 7, Department 21, reduction of 10% in personal service and in material services. I don't think we're done with that subject. And number 8, EMS fund reduction of $16,000 in personal service and reduction of $16,000 in ambulance revenues. Number 9, EMS fund repayment of new fire truck loan. Number 10, EMS fund reduction of $60,000 to cover deficit expense in the expenditure line item. Number 11, city light changed street light revenue to what was brought in by streets and sent to city light. Number 12, capital reserve revenue, sale of old fire state as revenue line item for $300,000. Number 13, capital reserve revenue, sale of old fire station modular as a revenue line item for $10,000. Number 14, capital reserves revenue, sale of old fire truck for $10,000. Okay, what about the, okay. Change to kind of look through our first budget papers to determine, in this number 2, to see if anything has been forgotten. So we're just gonna kind of be silent here and, oh, I just found my papers. Right here.
Except for the EMS.
Yeah.
It's a use of city property. I don't see that on this list.
It was removed from street.
Use of city property in the street fund.
We've done it, it isn't on the list. I'll add it.
Transient room assessment being moved up to $90,000 in the general fund, okay. Planning fees and engineering estimates and adding the line items.
Yeah, that's on the list.
Okay. Well, I thought this list said all the changes they made.
No, this,
It is on the new one that they just handed us.
Okay.
it's, this list,
I thought the list.
it's the best I could pull out of my brain.
Okay.
So that's why I'm asking you to look at it to make sure that I haven't, there are things that we have actually done in the budget that are not on this list that I just didn't think of.
Okay, we'll go through the
Sure,
changes that
sure.
I have marked in my book, and there are others in the minutes, just to make sure.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying these changes aren't done on the new budget, I'm saying they're not on the list.
Mm-hmm.
Don?
We changed the contract planning, the engineering, that's what's done to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On both
Yeah.
revenues and expenditures, yes.
Summer recreation director,
Mhm.
2,000.
Yeah.
Travel and training to 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the changes regarding the removal of flowers,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, to a new fund? Is that in a new fund
Yeah,
now?
new, has its own line item.
Okay, that's great.
State revenue sharing, that, state revenue sharing,
It's in here.
Okay, travel and training in
You gave us a,
government community and relations,
you-
reduced
you-
to 15.
yeah, you basically gave us a number to work to in total, and we agreed to, I mean, we put that in here.
7,500
We,
square
exactly, exactly. We reduced it, I think, from like 10,000 and,
4,300 we removed from use of city property.
mhm.
From the streets. There were some changes made here, and I don't understand my hand scratching, I'd have to go back and look at the minutes. The summer recreation director, that $2,000, that's been changed back,
Mhm. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
and the special events
And
over
we
there.
put it in the special events, exactly, okay.
And games, under recreation, $500 was also put there.
I have
That's all
that
in
too.
there.
Is that done also, the $500?
Yeah, yeah, it's in there.
All ordinance enforcement costs are gone.
Yes,
Street lighting revenues have been moved.
yes.
Darlene?
Did we figure out what we were doing with the public works superintendent wages that were in there? Did those get taken out and reflected accurately?
Yeah, we moved it from a personnel services to a contract, and we put the extra money into, extra work, extra labor for summer, especially for summer.
And what did you do with the medical benefits for that position? Those $22,000?
We took, yeah, it was, what we did is we took the total amount of money and subtract for, for all that, not just salary, health, blah, 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 and subtracted the contract, and the balance all went into extra work, extra labor to hire people in the summer.
And I show that meter maintenance fees went from 58 to 6,000. I don't know if it's right or not, but that's what I wrote.
The proper adjustments have been made to the tourism fund to offset both the change in projected revenues from, transit room tax and the removal of the flowers and stuff.
Right. I'm not sure about Dawn's question.
On page 29, I show that on revenue for the water,
You
121.
went to 6,000, Don.
Yeah, that's what I wrote, I guess it,
Yes, it
because
is.
it meant something.
Okay,
It did.
yeah.
The audio allowance was removed from all funds.
Yes.
And on the interfund transfer,
What page?
page 11, 1722 went to, I got here 2,122, is that something that's supposed to happen? I wrote it
No,
down.
I have that same thing. We changed the contingency from 1,722
To
to
2,000.
2,122
No, you're in street fund?
for some
On
reason.
page 31,
Oh, 31. Yeah, you said 11.
Yeah, no, this is on page 31.
Okay, 31, gotcha. Now, what is it?
total contingency, I show it, for some reason, it went from 1722 to 2122.
$400 was added.
That's what I show also.
Where did it come from? Does anybody remember?
1722 went to what?
2122 for some reason.
2122.
We'll have to look back at that motion because,
You got the same thing?
yes, we added $400 to 1,722 and came up with 2,122.
I don't remember where it came.
Okay, when Mary says what happened is when we made all the changes to Department 21, it increased the contingency. It was for here.
To 2122.
Yeah. Even though you had said it was going to go up by a certain amount, it went up by more than that
It went up by more than that.
because of Department 22.
Okay.
So that just,
I didn't think we placed the money from that 10% change. We didn't even have a conversation about money about that.
well, and what we did is, with the money that was freed up, not knowing where you wanted it, we just put it in contingency to be used.
Well, that could be true, but we made a change.
Right.
That reflected a $400 change, and it had nothing to do with the 10% out of Fund 21 or administration.
And it's in here. It's in this number. In other words, two things happened. You increased it, we made a note of it, and then we had to increase it even further,
That's right.
yeah, because of the
You
department.
remember that?
Yeah, but I have the same.
Yeah. All it's done, this just shows how they got more money.
I remember it now.
Now, either you or the council can take that money and redistribute it some other way, but at this point, I think it's better just to leave it in contingency and let the department figure out what to do with it.
Now, I show a change to the sewer bond fund because we serviced a $20,000 payment.
What
And what
page?
page is that?
36.
36.
Oh, almost there.
Okay,
That $20,000, that's one of the first things we did, actually, I think on the first night.
Right.
Okay. And so we made an extra $20,000 payment with that money.
and that's why it shows a negative 20,000, it went down to 33,711.
Right.
We made it.
And then,
I, for some reason, had it at 31,757.
no, that's the, right below, yeah.
Yeah, it moved it down. So the 11,757 went up to 31,757.
Treatment,
So where did the flowers and the flower?
They're in property.
They're in the general fund
In
and
the general
property.
fund and
There's a new line item specifically for them that we broke out from plants, just so everybody understood that it was there.
Right, yeah, I thought we were leave out the beautification.
yeah, and
We wanted a
contract services,
uncreated,
do
a
you have that
beautification
35?
uncreated, that was the
Or
vote.
83,479?
And that's what I asked, has it been moved to a beautification, not a line item, a fund?
So you wanted that to be a line item in tourism, not the general fund?
No,
No, it's in the general
a
fund.
separate
Yeah.
fund
Oh,
for
okay.
tourism.
Oh, all right, so,
Fund?
I mean, for beautification.
Well, kind of a sub-fund, I guess.
A department in the general fund
Yes,
Okay, and,
called beautification.
yes.
Yes,
so
right.
what page are we on?
That's what we said very clearly.
Okay,
when we voted on
what
it.
page is tourism?
Tourism's on,
Have that?
on
35.
22 and 23.
22, 23,
Hi.
okay.
Do you have a change on page
I think we're
35
about done,
for
actually.
83,
Go over
479?
it next time. Darlene?
Do you remember, is the money reflected for that, we were gonna investigate those
you don't.
costs put into
83,
water
471.
and streets?
We put them in the contingency to be investigated at a later date.
That's a different page,
And-
and a different
Can we,
one.
we're getting too far off for a minute. Can we stick in tourism in you wanted a beautification line item, correct?
No,
A beautification
beautification
department
Okay.
in the general fund
Separate,
Oh.
is what she's telling me right
Okay,
now.
I thought it was in tourism.
no, I thought we made that clear. Not in
Yeah.
tourism.
I haven't
Separate
created a
fund.
separate department.
Okay,
Okay, and
I haven't
what
created
money,
a separate department.
okay, we'll include that. Now, what monies go in there?
Everything that was taken out of tourism for beautification purposes. It amounted to $11,000.
Flowers?
11,515.
Right.
Line items, what
Right.
line items go in, or what do you ask?
it's all those miscellaneous
And
charges
this
we were,
actually is in your minutes
Yeah.
someplace.
Okay,
because this
okay,
was
well,
done very clearly.
that's why we're
It is.
having the conversation. Okay, so
Yeah.
there's gonna be a beautification department in the general fund, we'll move those line items in there.
yeah, and it's 11,515.
Make a note of that, Cheryl.
11,515.
in the
In
beautification
beautification.
department.
Personal
Right.
services.
Okay,
It was personnel expenses, utilities, contract services, miscellaneous.
okay, we got
Plants
it,
and supplies.
we got it.
Just make a new line item under property.
Okay,
Next.
and also the reserve,
remember?
total in the sewer bond fund, has
The
been
general
reduced to
fund.
$60,300,
What
correct?
page, what page?
39,
38
Okay,
of the old,
and it's been, say it again, it's been what?
it's been reduced to $60,300.
Correct, yes,
And
we
the
did that.
next, yeah, is 33,711, right, we did do that.
Mhm.
And on page 35, do you have a change from, what is it, 90,000 to 83,479?
Wait a minute, page 35,
Yeah,
which one?
contract treatment
I
plant.
don't have them all.
Yeah, we reduced it from 93,000 to 83,471.
I have 83,479, yeah.
471 is what?
Yeah, 471 is what we,
Okay,
That's the contract.
yeah.
okay.
Okay, next.
Where's the, I'm sorry.
Darlene?
Page 28, under cemetery contingency, we changed it from 8,225 to 4,225.
Correct.
Yes.
Where is it reflected that, where we took the, monies for the repayment of the $45,000 that we overpaid on the fire, that was overpaid on the fire hall? Where's that reflected in the budget? We were gonna put it in a holding contingency for the water.
capital reserve.
So 18 something, no,
10,000 went into streets and 8,000 and some odd went into water to be held
And it's in
until an
contingency.
investigation could be
And
completed.
With a note on hold.
In,
On hold.
in contingency.
In contingency. Any other,
Page 46, that
Can we
million
do all of the
500,000.
tracings in there? We had 498.
46, what do you have, Don?
John?
That $1,500,000
Yes.
is supposed to be 500,000.
Yes, it is,
Right.
it is.
It is. It dropped $1 million.
I know this isn't probably but there's something that just came to mind, because last night we approved the library, that we have library expense in there, $2,000, but you took the whole $2,000 out. I think we have to put a little bit of money in there because we have to pay for the monthly telephone bill for the library.
That comes out of general.
Oh, it comes out of general fund?
Mhm.
Okay.
The library expense in Department 8 was the $2,000. The
Department
general
8.
fund picks up
And
the
do
library
I
fund.
understand that you're going to negotiate the $1,600, that won't be income because it will probably go back to the library and negotiate?
In some form, I think that's what the intent will be for the council. But that's for the council to
It's a
decide.
discussion item.
Yeah.
But it's an anticipated income, is that?
And it is in the budget as an anticipated income.
Okay.
And I have a streetlight
Thanks, Ian.
sales of
Now,
28,000.
I want to know also, because of something that I overheard at the council meeting last night, is there a line item that could handle something like a special election? If there were an initiative or something presented by the citizens, is there a line item here to accommodate a special election? Because I think we could reasonably anticipate that there could be one.
It's not in here. I mean, we could put it in, I was thinking it could go in Department 8, Government Community Relations, but it's not in here.
How does the committee feel about that?
Probably be a good idea.
I have no idea.
Mary Ann, Richard, have any idea what it costs to put something on the ballot?
I
Kathy had a
called
number,
once
but I don't know
before,
what it was.
and they said it depends on, it can be quite expensive, like up to $1,500, but it could be a lot cheaper. It would depend on if other governments in the same boat, on the same ballot,
Well,
are
if you're-
running initiatives and they share expenses.
I mean, if you're running in a general election, then you don't have to
No,
pay.
you're
But
running
whereas
in
if you run it as a special election, you do. If you want it in here, I mean, we could put a plug number in there. I could talk to Kathy, she would know the price. But then you almost have to make a decision, do you want to run as a general or as a special? Which is
Well,
a
you don't
stretch.
have any choice, it depends on when citizens present, basically, the rules of an election, there are some things that will force the city into paying for a special election.
Okay, well, let me talk,
And they don't have the option of waiting
if
for 2 years.
the committee wants, I can put a line item in here, and we will put in a number that, after we talk to Kathy. It's up to you.
I personally think it's an anticipated expense that could happen if there were to be any kind of a increase in rates at all, that could trigger it. A recall, which was threatened last night, could
Well,
trigger it.
we've also talked about going out with new SDCs.
Uh-huh.
So having one number in there and a line item, I think is probably a good idea, because there's a lot of different things that are being talked about.
I think it would be smart to have it in there. So could I have a consensus from the committee that this is, yes, Bobby?
If my memory serves any purpose at all, I believe it was $3,000 was mentioned during the last election
Well,
cycle.
Kathy would know the number, and we can put the number in, so
Yeah,
that's,
I really
that's,
don't know.
we'll put it in as a special election and have a placeholder in dollars.
And I don't think they can give you a special number. It depends on who else is running something on the same ballot, because they'll share costs.
Sure, but we can get
You
it.
can only force an election on election dates.
Mhm.
But unless it's a general election, either every 2 years, they offer you an opportunity to do this at no cost. Otherwise, the municipality is responsible for
Well,
paying for it.
we'd come up with a rough number.
And also, I wanted to also mention, I've been hearing a lot about a town hall meeting. Do we have enough money in here if that's what the council decides to afford them to be able to do that?
The town hall meeting, if we did it, was like $750.
And do we have money in here for that, or that would
Not-
accommodate
not-
that?
No, specifically, no.
No. But there's not a line item in here for that.
But is there a fund that could be covered out of
Yeah, it would be,
properly?
yeah, it would be out of the general fund.
So, would the committee,
Facilitators
Okay.
make good money.
Well, let's do it out of government community relations, and I'll put an item in there.
I don't think we've had a consensus of the committee yet.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that's where I'd put it, would be there if you wanted it.
Okay. Is everybody in favor of adding those two items to our budget? Allowing for the possibility of either a town hall meeting or an election? Okay, everybody in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, it passes. And if we could do that, I think that would be. Can anybody think of any other unforeseen or things that we could anticipate that may need budgeting for? Because this is the last shot.
Well,
Yes, Rich?
yeah, I think this will hopefully get us to the 99% level. We're gonna, she's gonna make the changes, and you have it, yeah, I know, Kemosabe.
Got a mouse?
But tomorrow you have another hearing scheduled, another meeting scheduled with community comment, so you have one last shot if you think of something I forgot.
George?
Actually, it gets back to, and I need to ask Richard, but about recoating the gymnasium floor in City Hall here.
Nope, no money,
No money, so
no money.
is it possible that,
There's not even money to fix the toilet.
Oh, great.
The floor.
The floor
the
around the
floor of
toilet.
the toilet? Yeah, okay.
Either way, it's gonna hurt.
Anyway, whether or not you want to allocate, the estimate was $3,000 just for materials, not for labor. The labor was all going to be donated. So
That was for the fixing the toilet floor and the gym, either one.
So
Just
that would be
three
the
each.
property?
it would be in the property, I think, yeah.
What page is
Is
that?
that possible for you to come up with that
Oh,
money?
that's the,
What page is that?
I mean, we took it out because there wasn't any money, so.
Okay.
Darlene,
Page 44.
is that of the old one?
Old one?
Well, I'm comparing
all
the
the
old one
same.
to the new one, and there's, on the new one, there's a whole bunch of parentheses, changes made, but there's not a total at the bottom. Should there be a total there?
Hang on. Well, there's a total under, yeah,
Yeah,
Probably.
that's just changes, you don't total the changes.
yeah,
You total
there's a
all.
total,
They were totaled and all the rest of them, I thought.
It didn't just move, the formula didn't move over. It should come to zero. I mean, it will come to zero, which is the very bottom line, but I will make sure that formula goes over. It just didn't go over.
So, and then on page 46, I show where it says, okay, the street light sales, is that correct reflection there of how Tracy recommended doing
Yes.
that?
That is Tracy's recommendation.
I think that probably,
Sherelle has a question too.
Sherelle,
I'm sorry, I hate to regress, but I was just reviewing the minutes for the 25th meeting when the property department was on the agenda and it was discussed and approved. And I didn't find anything in any of the 25th minutes that said there was a consensus or a motion to approve a beautification fund. So I just wondered if, because the property department was passed, so if you wanted to take a consensus to add the beautification fund, so it's on the
Okay.
record.
Department,
Sorry,
why
beautification
don't
department.
why don't we do that on a motion? Does somebody have a motion for that, to add a beautification
Department,
department?
I'll make that motion.
okay?
I'll second it.
Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, motion passes.
Anything else?
We pretty well did it tonight, didn't we?
Got 7 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we need to clarify the administration.
Okay. Sherelle?
The minutes for, that were on the agenda for approval haven't been approved yet.
Oh, okay,
That's right.
okay.
One for June 3rd.
You could still
All
read
I
them.
have to do is find it. Yeah,
June
I
3rd.
lost it.
You could still read
Was
the minutes.
last, was given to you last meeting.
Oh,
Let's
Oh.
finish
Probably
off
not.
this,
Yeah.
let's get this over with, and then we'll do this at the very last. We'll do the minutes very last, absolutely backwards. Let's clarify the administrative deduction that we made, and what are the expectations there. It was my understanding that there would be a 10% reduction with the exception of contract services.
In personnel services and in material services
Exactly.
in Department 21. Under,
Administration, I think, is how it was put, with the exception of contract services. Laura?
right.
I thought that we as budget made the dollar calculation as far as cut it, reduce it by 10%, and then the council decides where.
That
Exactly.
was right.
That's the way it should be.
okay?
That's the way it was.
And so, is that the understanding that, let's have a show of hands of everybody who, when they voted, thought they were voting for across-the-board reduction of 10%, not to transfer that burden somewhere else?
Voted against it, so.
Okay, so obviously that's what was intended by the committee. So we don't need to revisit that. Okay, so is there anything you'd like to add to our conversation, Kevin? Okay, now, yes, Laura, go
It's
ahead.
very inconsequential, I'm sure, but, the library telephone thing, it says here under government 1.8 that we took out the whole 2,000, so how's going to take it over?
The general fund has always paid the library phone bill.
Can we put it in a line item as the library, or it's just under phone?
It's just under telephone, and we've always paid the phone bill. It's not very much, so we've always paid it.
All right, thank you.
Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes that we were given last week for June 3rd, 2011? And does anybody have corrections?
Yeah, okay.
Somebody want to make a motion to approve these minutes?
No.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of June, what,
June 3rd.
third.
Second.
Everybody in favor of approval of the June 3rd minutes, please say aye. Anybody opposed? Did you vote,
I don't know what to do.
Lance?
I'll abstain.
Okay.
You didn't call for abstentions.
The minutes are approved with one abstention. And I don't think we need to set next, do you want to set the property
Well,
tax rate tonight?
two things I'd suggest doing. One basically is that we're going to redo the budget, but with, in terms of all the funds in the budget, you feel comfortable that it's where they're supposed to be, we'll redo them, we'll bring it back to you. So the only question outstanding then would be, do you want to set the property tax approval rate, or the property tax rate? And get it over with. I know, but I wanted to make sure that everybody felt the whole budget was in pretty good shape and we were ready to print it for you.
Somebody's gonna have to lead that besides me, because, what do you do to approve the rate? I mean, do we have,
You just approved the tax rate,
Which is,
What is the rate again?
which is in the original packet.
which
2.75,
is 2.75,
isn't that what it is?
that's the millage.
Yeah. No,
It's death and taxes.
yeah.
You get no choice. There you go.
anybody find that in our original, paper?
We're looking.
What page it could be on?
Question?
Question, yes.
Can we clarify why there was a reduction of the property tax revenues in the general fund? Did we discuss that tonight and I forgot?
Well, I
Well, I can,
satisfied that that.
while you're looking for it, the other one, let me explain it. We are currently at $181,945.23. The May income is $71.80. So even without the June property tax income, we're at $189,125.
That's
So,
what we have right now.
yes,
189,000.
that's what we're going to have. The June, so I just set it at 190. So those are actuals,
Okay.
not blue sky projections. That's why I said it that way.
Did you find that page number?
The property tax is set at 2.705 per 1,000.
And so, how is this worded?
You just make a motion needs to be made to accept the property tax rate of
705.
$2.705
$1,000 assessment.
per $1,000 assessment for budget year fiscal 11-12.
How much, 275?
2.7005.
50.
Make a motion to approve the tax rate at 2.705 per thousand assessed, is that assessed value?
Which sheet?
Good second?
I second it.
Everybody in favor? Is there any discussion?
This doesn't represent any change in the tax rate.
No,
No.
we're taxed at the maximum.
But it does represent taxing at the maximum.
I personally would like to see this reduced eventually, to reflect what we're supposed to do when we charge money onto our municipal electric company. It says clearly that you can charge it, but it should be used to reduce taxes. And that's always been interpreted as, well, if we don't raise taxes, then we've reduced them. And I have a problem with that because taxes are at their maximum. But we can't do it now. Yes, Darlene.
There was a statement made by a citizen that said that perhaps the property tax was reduced years ago, and that reduction has been carried forward, but we don't know. When that law came about, there could have been a reduction years ago, and that carried forward. It was just a comment by a citizen. That it
Well-
doesn't necessarily have to reduce the property tax yearly, but it may have reduced it somewhere in the past that we haven't seen. It was just a comment.
Well, since we're being taxed at the maximum rate, I don't see any reduction. So we need to vote on this motion. Everybody in favor of accepting, of Tiffany's motion to accept the would you read it? I'm sorry.
2.705 per thousand assessed value.
Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That passes.
And you're right on time.
Yeah.
Make a motion to continue the meeting till tomorrow night.
Isn't that nice?
Have a second?
Oh, well, wait, before we do that, we do have a council special meeting at
6 o'clock to address the MOU with, regarding Cascade Meadows.
So does that move our meeting back?
No.
Okay.
We did it intentionally 1/2 hour before because that would be more than enough time. And Ruby Mason from the Housing Authority will be here if you have any questions.
Madam Chair, I will not be able to be tomorrow. I have to be at the Hoover County.
Okay, well, thank you for coming tonight. And is there a second on Tiffany's motion? Okay, everybody in favor, please say aye. Don, did you have something to say?
No.
Okay. Are we continued now?
Yes?
Okay,
We're adjourned.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.